Hello, and welcome to episode 49 of the Following Mechanical Turks project. So today, probably what we're going to do is talk about the second phase of data collection for the second project. And it's easy to get kind of lost in all of this. But one thing is, at this point, we've essentially finished, hopefully, the first product, right? So the first product or first paper in the project that dealt with text analysis of hits we collected. We recently submitted a revised version of that.
Yep.
In fact, let me just share my screen here. Yeah, why not that one? And so those revisions responded to reviewer comments. It was a significant revision, mostly looking at contextualizing the subject. Through an introduction that points out what Mechanical Turk is, why it's relevant to contemporary conversations, and current sort of interdisciplinary scholarship. Provides a screenshot of what the interface looks like, and therefore also examples of the hits themselves that we were collecting.
Yeah.
Also, explicates the methods and connection to this project. In sort of the earlier versions, we didn't really clarify the connection between the paper and the project, and that caused some issues because if you weren't familiar with the project, parts of the paper were ambiguous.
Yeah.
So hopefully that's been clarified. And we'll also see here these.
Both those. I like the way these turned out. The video.
Yeah. So this is one version you can see where, and this is also what it looks like on mobile. When you scroll the embedded clips here, which I've now given thumbnails, so there are, you can see down there thumbnails. You'll notice on mobile, the placement is a little odd. I don't think there's a way to fix that, in that it's just giving a sort of a small fraction there. But anyway, they pop up like that. If you look at it on, really all it has to do is with this screen size. So if you look at it on your browser here at a larger screen size, the video clips pop up in a slightly different way.
And those video clips are from previous episodes where we met with scholars, and so we sort of, on the advice of Jeff primarily, the editor intermezzo, they're sort of not behind the scenes, but that those videos go back to earlier conversations that we've had. Sort of making a connection between those conversations and then the sort of finished product that people are reading. So it's a way of linking the work of this sort of public scholarship we've been doing to the final form that the article has taken. So yeah,
and you can see they function in a way sort of like footnotes. They use this embedded resource link. You can see here, there are two of them that are close, so it does this nice sort of stacking thing. When there's one on its own, it just sort of drops in by itself here. You can see it zoom into place. And as you say, those are explicated here in the methods, where it talks about the labor that those video clips are doing. They're also now set up such that they're brief in this overlay that pops up previously.
And we were really excited to talk to you in part.
Previously, they were time-coded links, but as Jeff pointed out, that didn't really give you a return, right? It pointed to the longer episodes, but in this case, there's 2 minutes with Kathleen Fitzpatrick about generous thinking. And then once it's done, it's done, and you can simply just close it out and you return to the text. So it's just integrated a lot better. And as you say, it points out, in keeping with this project's conceit and sort of its production process, the invisible and communal intellectual labor that goes into generating scholarship, right? Because in most scenarios, these kinds of things are happening, not through video chats with people you invite, but certainly through conversations and reading,
Yeah.
and a lot of that gets elided. And I added in a annotation there, pointing out that annotations, it's still open to public annotations. Anywho, that's been submitted. We'll see what Jeff says. I see this as fairly stable, but we'll see, where it goes from here.
Yeah.
All right.
No,
anyway.
I like the sort of two moves that within the text itself, not assuming that people would know the project before reading the piece. But then the videos do a nice job of then sort of introducing that project as a way of sort of footnoting that work.
Yeah. All right, so that one's done. So we've been working on the second product, of the overarching project. That second product, as we address in the discussion and then explicitly in the conclusion of that first project, it says, here's what the second project is going to look like, because we have a pretty, crystallized understanding of that at this juncture. And largely it's picking up the concept of readability, which emerged in that first project. Sort of one of the main threads we talk about is readability. And it's ambiguity, that it both means decryption of alphanumeric characters, but then also the intellectual acts of generating meaning out of those things, right? Readability is not a simple mechanical, and all of these are loaded terms, but they're the terms we have. Act of, well, this is an A, this is a 2. It has to do with ascertaining, semantic meaning of those things. Or as we discuss in the paper, in a sense, even that is concealing that it's producing meaning, right? Mm-hmm. It's a little tricky to say, well, it's just, you have a piece of paper, so you state what's on there. It's like, well, you're really in a lot of senses making what that is.
Yeah.
Right. And this is covered, I think, at length in that first paper about what that process suggests, right? So readability, not only of texts also, but as we saw in our results, there's a broader notion of what readability means, because we talk about things like, images. So a good example is something like hits that say, find the edges of a building in this picture and tell us how damaged it is. And that's a sophisticated reading task, right?
Yeah.
Because things like picking out the images in a 2D image, where the edges of a 2D image, where you have to then creatively impose 3-dimensional space, right? That's kind of tricky for machines to say, all right, well, I'm looking at a 2D image. I can't impose depth. I can't say, well, that's a building that's close against the foreground. They can, but they can't do it like we, and of course, most organic life, because we inhabit a 3-dimensional plane, seemingly. So it's not only that, but it's
nice
also
caveat.
like, what's that?
I like the caveat.
I don't want to paint myself into the number of dimensions we inhabit, right? Anyway, it's not just, edge finding. It's also like, so can we live in this structure, or is it too damaged for that?
Yeah,
is this car sufficiently totaled for a write-off, or what?
Well, that gets it to what we were trying to sort of parse about readability as both a kind of, and again, it's difficult to parse this without then imposing a binary that we're also sort of taking issue at, right? Sort of, perceptual task of this building is in front of this building. And then the kind of judgment oriented? Is it too damaged to live in, right? Those, in some instances, those are two different kinds of readability, right? Being able to notice a discrete object and then being able to assess that object in terms of a not a cultural category, but like a norm or something like that.
Yeah, and so we're seeing those things as collapsed in
Yeah.
the use of something like readability. And then also, of course, things like situations are readable, right? A good example is the trope, read the room, right?
Right,
What
right.
you're really talking about is situational awareness. There were some hits that were kind of interesting that asked Turkers to do things like watch this video clip and then, make a suggestion about what's going to happen next. Right?
Yeah.
And it's, in a sense, a readability task. It's like, well, they're fighting. It looks like, they're going to shout at each other or whatever, right? So anywho, that was one of the main things. As we saw in our discussion, readability is, we really talk about really two themes and then talk about how they're connected. The other theme is trauma. And I've been making notes about this. So it's like coming out of that first product, it seems like there's a couple of ways you could go in terms of next steps, right? Readability is one, trauma is another. I think one good way of answering the question of why didn't you then deal with trauma, since it's such a main piece of what you talk about there, is there's no way we're going to do that.
Right. I mean, this goes back to our conversation with Kegel about
yeah, exactly.
What would we have to do as researchers to do that? And basically, yeah, we're not going to do that.
And I mean, I think an even, one answer to that is just we're not qualified to do that. But another answer is the system itself. I mean, one of the things we pick out is, for example, like IRB isn't uniformly imposed on the system. We've referred to that piece of journalism that's about, I don't even think we reference it in the paper, but we talk about it all the time. The one that's, I relived my worst day for 50 cents, right?
Right.
Where it's like, even as researchers participating in that doesn't, as Kegel points out, it doesn't wholly excuse what you're doing, right? Where it's like there's ethical concerns saying, I'm studying trauma by asking you about your trauma. It's like, that's a really serious ask. It's not, you're no longer afforded the partition of, I'm a researcher, so therefore what I'm doing, it contributes to the greater good. So if you're informed, then everything we do here is fine. It's like, I don't know. There's real ethical issues where it's like, if I'm just another person and giving you 50 cents to relive your trauma, there's no difference in the fact that I'm doing it for research versus you're doing it for whatever other commercial reasons you have.
Yeah. I mean, that were some of the I think a talk that Kegel gave that was a part of that, and maybe it was a panel that she was on, but even people that want to go research some of these terrible websites, right? Even going to the website increases its traffic and thus its profitability, right? I mean, even at the level of the most basic level of participation, which is just typing in the URL, you're already, Yeah,
I mean, this observation gets in some ways misused, but it's still applicable that, there is probably no such thing as just neutral observation, right? I mean, it gets wrapped up in the sort of Heisenberg notion of you can't just watch without changing. And, that's become a metaphor. I mean, maybe it's sloppily applied, but the metaphor is effective. I mean, we see that in a lot of scenarios where it's like, there is no neutral observation. You're still participating in different ways. Even if you're not necessarily directly changing the thing, your participation is still something, right?
Right.
So I think that's one way of explicating in that second piece. It's like really two threads came out because they're the two we had in our discussion, which is readability and trauma, and they're linked because in trauma, still what you're trying to do is make your trauma intelligible at larger scales, right? We talk about telling in the discussion. The notion of you're not just recapping your trauma for its own sake. It's to make it intelligible. It's to make it readable in the aggregate, right?
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. But we're not going to be dealing with that aspect. We're looking at different notions of scenic readability, because what we're looking at isn't straight just, it's like summarize a chapter, because we're also looking at things like the related video clip, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what I've been seeing, jumping a little bit ahead, but what I've been seeing and looking at the data we've collected is the notion of reading the scene is really kind of interesting, because like I kept seeing all these weird summaries that Turkers were providing of the media. We have 4 different types of media. They're all related. They're not identical, but we've got, a paragraph describing a father and son working through a math problem. Then we've got a video clip of you and your son doing that. The audio clip, which is just the audio from the video stripped out. And then a image, which is a still. And it's interesting now that I've done it, looking at the summaries of those things that Turkers provided, because I kept seeing things like that had to do with legality of the people in the clip. And at first I thought, well, this is just like nonsense or a non-English speaker or a bot. But then I was like, wait, why does this keep cropping up? It's because you and your son talk about the number 18 in the clip. And there kept being these things saying, they're talking about legal age. And I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about? And then I was like, wait, they discussed the number 18 repeatedly.
Yeah.
And the context is strange because like you can't really suss out, particularly in the audio, like what the situation is. It's just 2 people saying, I could be 18. It's like, you couldn't be. And I'm like, oh. This takes on this whole other, ambiguous valence.
Right.
Just from what's being discussed there, where, like if you watch the video, it's a lot more clear. In the paragraph, even though we explicitly didn't really clarify, here's what the scene is, because we wanted the Turkers to do that, it's just a little more clear. Oh, they're working through a math problem. But like in the audio clip, it's just sort of this fuzzy, back and forth about the number 18 and whether it could be 18.
Right.
And so it invites this cultural interpretation of they're talking about the legality of, of a person
Something.
or an act,
Yeah.
Because like buying cigarettes kept coming up and I was like, what? And I was like, oh, are they potentially attributing this to, an age threshold?
Right.
Anyway, all that
also, Will keeps buying cigarettes.
Yeah, his voice gets pretty husky halfway through. Anywho, so we're looking at some different notions of readability in this second one. And as we've already jumped to, the way we're doing that is asking Turkers to read something. 4 different types of media that are related. I mean, the easy way to say it is they're the same thing, just in 4 different media, right? Text, image, video, and audio. But of course, they're not exactly the same thing because they can't be.
As we're learning.
Yeah. Yes. And what we asked them to do was answer in the first phase 3 questions. One was provide a readable, we did explicitly use that term, 1-sentence summary of whatever the media is. And then 1 question that asked on a 4-point scale, rate the clarity of the instructions, and then provide a sentence explaining your rating. And then a 3rd prompt saying on the same 4-point scale, rank the fairness of your compensation, and a sentence explaining that. And then what we did was vary the title and description and compensation of that task in different ways. Basically, and it starts to get confusing here, even for us who've dealt with it a lot. Basically, there are, it's 10 permutations of each of those, because we've got 2 different versions of the title and description. One of them focuses on the task you're doing. The other version focuses on the time it takes, because that's something we noticed in dealing with our first product. There are in titles and descriptions ones that sort of explicate, here's what we want you to do. And there are others that explicate things like your investment, like it is a 2-minute survey. Right? It doesn't tell you what it is. It's a 2-minute survey. So we were looking at that because we want to look at readability, not just of Turkers reading different things, but also readability from the perspective of requesters composing readable hits, right? There are a lot of threads to keep straight in old Duder's head here, because there's just like, there's a lot of stuff to potentially, or to discuss potentially.
Yeah, I mean, both logistically, but also right at every sort of logistical system has a bearing upon our engagement with the concept of readability. There's not a part of what we're doing that isn't in some way resonant with that theme.
Yes, including stuff like, the non-human aspects of it, how the system itself handles this, I mean, in a sort of Luturian mold, it's not innocuous, it's a translation, so it is doing labor and this kind of thing. Now, as before, what I suspect is all of these threads probably won't get picked up like in the work itself. As before, it's like there are a billion things we could talk about. And one of the tougher tasks is, but what are you going to talk about in a way that's coherent and not just going off in 50 different directions, So anywho, there's two main sort of variations in terms of that. Title and description focused on either the time it takes or what you're doing. And then within those, there are 3 different compensation levels, right? Starting at $1 for the task, which is appropriate. I mean, we looked at sort of the statements about what ethical compensation is on the platform per minute, basically. So we were, even at our lowest level, seemingly in excess of that threshold, right? We had $1, $1.50, and $2 to see if things like compensation level make a difference, right? In what's produced in terms of the results, but also things like rating of fairness, right?
Yeah.
Because that is an aspect, right? Compensation is an aspect of this whole thing. I mean, you could say a big aspect of readability isn't necessarily like how it's written, but it's like, how much am I going to get to do this?
Right.
I'm willing to do this at all, or maybe even struggle through some things if the pay is a little better or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, kind of what we were getting at in the first piece, right? That the notion of what constitutes human intelligence is in part defined by the parameters of the task.
Mm-hmm.
Insofar as my intelligence is relative to the task, and one of the features of the task is its compensation and duration.
Yes. Yep.
I can be as dumb or as smart as I need to be.
Yeah. So what does that parse things into? I think it's 6 there. How many did? Well, I get a little lost. And then there are some hits that we posted that are at the highest compensation level, but have a qualification applied to them. That because for many of the tasks, the doors were sort of open. We didn't apply any qualifications. For some tasks, we offered the highest compensation level, excuse me, but then we also required that you had to, as a Turker, you had to have replied to a certain number of hits. I believe that threshold was 5,000, which sounds like a lot, but apparently isn't. And you had to have a certain acceptance rate, which again, I think it was 98 plus or even greater than 98. I'll have to check.
Yeah, I remember. It was really high.
It sounds really high, but again, it is apparently not. The expectation is that it does approach 100 in terms of acceptability for seasoned Turkers. So that was a permutation as well. And then one permutation was bonuses, is something we love to discuss.
Yes.
And this is something, that comes up obviously a lot on MTurk. is payment structures. And that is something we discuss in the first product is, payment operates in different ways. And it makes what we did in the first paper tricky, because like trying to figure out a per minute compensation rate for tasks is, very sort of fuzzy, because it's for a lot of reasons. One thing is a lot of tasks have bonuses applied to them where, the going rate might be very low, but you can earn a bonus, right?
Right.
So that's one thing. Another thing also is you're encouraged to give a generous time limit, which can make the per minute compensation seem low, because if you give someone an hour to do a 2-minute task, you're probably not really paying them a penny a minute, because it's not going to take them that long. Anyway, those are all, sorry.
No, right. It looks like it's per hour, but really depending on the speed at which someone does it, it actually is taking him 3 minutes. And then the whole the ratio now has changed.
And the system encourages that. I mean, it literally says be generous. Anywho, so, we're looking at bonuses. And, if we, for example, provided, in this case, the lowest compensation level for the task, but with the promise of a bonus based on how your submission did, essentially, right? So if the summary you submitted was in the second phase deemed one of the best summaries, you could get a high bonus, comparatively high bonus, higher than any of the base compensation rates, right? Our base compensation rates were $1, $1.50, $2. The bonuses, you were given $1 as your rate, but you could earn up to a $3 bonus, I believe. Yes, a $3 bonus. So, the whole thing would be $4 for you, which is quite generous with regard to the platform, obviously.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, like that could have taken you a couple minutes. So, $4 for 2 minutes, or, $2 a minute is a super high, hourly wage. Anyway, so the idea there was the promise of a bonus could potentially shape, right? I mean, it's like if it's a flat rate, there is no real incentive to do a great job at it, you probably still want to do an acceptable job to get paid. I mean, it could in theory be rejected, but you're not going to really probably have the incentive to sit there and be like, I want to do my very best summarization work, because there isn't that additional bonus incentive. That's the idea anyway. We don't know because we haven't processed the results yet. Anywho, so I think that's all the permutations. Wait, there's 5. So there's, whatever. So there's all these different permutations of this, and this is for each of the 4 media. So there's just a lot of different permutations. All told, there's, let me just share with you here. I've got them in front of me, for goodness sake. So you can see all these different permutations spilling out, right? Here's the bonus one for the video clip. You can also see instructions for the video clip at, oh wait, no, that still is the bonus. It's there's 2 versions of that, because this one is focused on time. This one is focused on the task. Then we've got the 6 for the 3 different compensation levels and the 2 different either time or task descriptions. Anywho, so there's a ton of these. Each one asks for 5. So for each of the 4 media types, we end up with 10 permutations, 5 each, so 50. There's 50 answers there. So phase 2 is for each of those 4 types, taking those 50 summaries we got. And as we've looked at on previous episodes, some of them seem like very much what you would expect in terms of like, yeah, this is a good one sentence summary of what the media thing is. Some of them are nonsensical. Some of them will just have a random word in there or something from the task description itself. So it's just sort of like it's copy and pasted. And we accepted those as long as they weren't profane, because that it's not my own Puritanism. It causes issues in Turk, where it's like if you have something that could be considered obscene, you may have to apply things like warnings and anywho. So things that are completely off topic are retained. One of my favorites that I kept seeing was the word nice, just in all caps.
Yeah.
So those are retained. Anything that is obscene is removed, but I don't think I saw anything yet that would qualify. So we want to, and here we are. We've got all of those. We're done with that. We're at stage or phase 2, where what we need to do is have other Turkers look at these summaries and then pluck out which ones are more and less readable. And they're not going to be doing that on the basis of all these different permutations. What we want to do is take all of those, throw them in a big pot and say, okay, which ones are more and less readable? And then on the back end, we can see, okay, the one deemed most readable by a long shot or a large amount, it came from this permutation, right? That way we can link up, oh, okay, sure enough, the ones that are driven by bonuses tend to score high. The ones that are like below flat rate tends, for example, we have no idea. But for example, we could match up. Is there any consistency in terms of like the scores and the mechanism used to produce those? Because that's an aspect of readability potentially, right? I mean, particularly as that's explicitly what we're asking for is readable summaries. So that's the next phase. That's where we are now, is doing that, right? Asking Turkers to pick those out. Now, obviously, you can't give them 50 and say, pick the best one, right? I mean, you can't do that. I mean, just psychometrically, that doesn't work. Humans can't really do that. I mean, you could do it. You can do it, but what you're going to get is going to be fuzzy. It's going to be hard to make a case. Anyway.
Right. They'll all sort of bunch up.
Well, yeah, I mean, it would depend on things like, are you showing them in the same order? Because if so, the earlier ones are almost definitely going to get picked more. Or it's going to be polar, the start and the end, the first thing you see in the last. And if you're doing it randomly, then you're probably going to get that effect is just going to wash. So it's going to be basically just sort of a random pick, more or less.
Right.
So the way we've set up doing it is we've got that pool. What we're going to do is show Turkers 4 that are not exactly randomly selected except with the additional aspect that each thing has to get shown an equal number of times, right? So the way to think of it is, it's not 4 randomly selected ones. Think of it as taking a deck of cards and shuffling it and then dealing those cards out, right? So that the pool is random and then the selections are dealt until the pool is emptied and then the pool is randomized again. That's the way to think of it. That's really not what's happening, but that's the way to think of it. That way, things are shown an equal number of times. What we're going to do is do that, right? Give the Turker 4 choices. They pick the best one. And then there are 2 questions. And we've sort of gone back and forth on the remaining 2 questions. They're the same as from the first thing. Is this clear and is this fair? But we were sort of wrestling with, do we want to ask them to write a sentence of explication? And the reason why we're talking about that is we're going to be getting so many responses.
Right.
We're not going to be able to get our arms around them by reading them. I mean, we could do, text mining like we did before, but then we're just sort of back to doing that. And so we were sort of talking about what purpose does asking the respondents to provide those sentences serve? If we can't really read them and understand them, what's the purpose there? I mean, and is it something like is it just to ensure they're humans, right?
Huh.
And if that's the case, are there other ways to get at that? And the answer is, yeah, there are. So here's one. Let me share the old screen here.
And it would be interesting, like, yeah, we collected all this data, but we're actually not going to analyze it because the purpose of collecting it was just to
right
ascertain.
Well, that came up. It's like, how super fair is it if, we collected all this data knowing we were going to throw it away because we weren't going to be able to use it effectively, right?
Yeah, or just use it as a CAPTCHA.
Well, see, that's the thing, right? I mean, it's like, there's nothing wrong with like getting a lot of data and then being like, well, we can't use this, so we can't use it. But going into it, if it's like, we're making you do something knowing we're going to toss it because it's a CAPTCHA. But quite literally, the thing of it is, if that's the goal, there are easier ways to do that, including CAPTCHAs.
Right.
So
it is interesting. I mean, there is a fair amount of, psychological research where you have participants do some task and the task is wholly unrelated, right? It's just being used to prime them, or
yeah.
So you'll actually have them write something, but you're actually not going to go back and look at it. It's just being used to, I mean, it's probably not applicable here, but it does resonate in terms of that kind of research model.
Yeah, and part of this also is related to things like compensation, right? I think we're paying 50 cents for this. Is it okay to ask them to do writing tasks if the compensation is lower, right? So for example, our lowest rate in the first one, you were writing 3 sentences and doing 2 multiple choice responses. It was 3 questions, but 2 of those questions were give us a multiple choice response and a sentence of explication. In this, since it's 50 cents, does it make more sense to do like 3 multiple choice questions or whatever? So anywho, here's one thing. MTurk lets you, it has a template for doing surveys off-site, right? So we were using MTurk's built-in tools for the first phase, just literally using its survey tools, which are more than adequate for what we were doing in that first one. Because in the second phase, we are asking that sort of weird, you've got to draw 4 responses from a pool of 50. That goes beyond really what Turks built-in tools can do. So we're using Qualtrics. My institution has an account with Qualtrics, as a lot of institutions do. And it's built for precisely this kind of thing. I mean, like, sure enough, as I was tinkering with it, I was like, well, surely this is easy. And it is, like anything, once you know how to do it, it is. And also, like, on the back end, Qualtrics, of course, gives you all kinds of good ways to get that information out, right, once it's in. So right now, the way this is set up, this is the gist of, this is MTurk's template. If you're using a third party like Qualtrics, and in fact, it even like mentions, there's documentation on MTurk. It's like, if you're using Qualtrics, do this, And so this is their template. It gives you this base sort of instructional content, which is like, click on this survey, and then when you finish, you're going to get a code. Come back and put that code in here and submit. So this is something that, assumedly Turkers are familiar with, because this is the template, right?
Yeah.
You don't have to use this, but this is the template that MTurk provides if you want to do a survey offsite. And you can see how it works, right? It's got a link, and then it says, put the code you get here. And so that's one thing you can do to ensure that what you're dealing with is a human and not a bot, is make your third-party service, Qualtrics, provide a code. Now, if it's the same code, that raises issues, because it's like, well, that code could be shared, right? And then people wouldn't have to necessarily do the survey in order to, they could just go pop in the code. So the takeaway is that code should be randomized, right? You should give each respondent a random code. They submit the code. Then you compare the codes you get here with the ones that were randomly assigned that Qualtrics remembers and associates with submissions, and you just match them up, right?
Right.
So if someone goes here and just pops in a random 6-digit code and expects to get paid, you just compare and say, well, do I see that code, attached to any of the submissions? If not, then I have no guarantee you actually did it and I can't pay you, right? If it is one of them, then we don't really match them up because we're doing this anonymously, but we at least can see, okay, yes, you did submit one. There you go. So here's your payment. So that's one way of ensuring that this is a human being and different human beings and that kind of thing. So another thing is, as you mentioned, CAPTCHAs. So, as I was putting this together, Qualtrics straight up has a CAPTCHA function on it. And comically enough, for our purposes, the one it adds is that one where you check a box and it says, I am not a robot, right?
Yeah.
When I saw that, I was like, we should put that in there just because it's just too precious at this point, that.
Yeah, no, well, and that way you get a screen grab of that so that every product so the first article starts with a person holding up a sign that says, I'm not a robot. And the second one will have an image of the CAPTCHA where you have to click a box that says, I'm not a robot.
Right.
Little Easter egg for longtime fans.
But so that one is there. And I did have it in the form that I compiled because originally we were using sort of a different mechanism. But then eventually I was like, if we're doing the random code thing, that CAPTCHA isn't really necessary. The random code is essentially there to prevent bots from filling this out. So an additional thing in the form itself that's asking you to prove that you're not a robot seems to be superfluous. I'm willing to be persuaded, but I eventually pulled it out because I was like, the job this is doing is already being done. And so if I'm putting it in there, I'm putting it in there just because I think it's cute.
Yeah, and we don't have to include it to include it.
So currently it's not in there. Again, I can be persuaded, but it seemed like
we only need one mode of verification, and we can still make note that such a box exists in the second product for the purposes of preciousness.
Right. Yeah, that was kind of my thinking as well.
Yes, we can have our preciousness and eat it too for product number 2.
So anywho,
yeah.
Well, go ahead.
Oh no, we're good.
Well, vamp for a second while I blow my nose.
Oh no, well I was going to say, and when it comes to preciousness, I have actually been referred to by a reviewer as Twee. So.
In this, or was it somewhere else?
Somewhere else.
Okay,
yeah.
Well that's good then.
And modeling. So this is in my wheelhouse.
Those two seem a little bit opposed. It's like you're going to one side of the highway and then the other.
Yeah, well, it depends on what it is I'm working on.
Yeah. Anyway, so what you're looking at now is a mock-up essentially of the form, right? And you can see it in mobile over here as well. So we've got our standard consent statement, right?
Yeah.
And I put that as a separate block so that you have to see it and then click through, right?
Yeah.
It's also why I put it here and not on mturk, because by default, this template has the instructions curiously collapsed, right? This is how it starts. If you want to see the instructions, you have to click it. I like that because it was like, well, I'm not going to put the consent language there because otherwise you could just skip. You're encouraged to skip right over it. So I put it on the form itself.
Yeah, particularly if you're working for pennies on the minute.
Yeah.
The fewer drop-down menus because literally those drop-down menus are over the course of a week costing you money.
And if it's presented to you collapsed, the implication there is you don't need to see this, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the optional reading list for a class.
Yeah, so this is the gist of what it looks like, right? Where it's got, please listen to this clip. The clip's embedded, although, well, we'll see in just a second here. And then it says, right, select what you believe is the most readable one-sentence summary. So we do have the language there of it from the provided list of options written by Turkers. I feel this bit is important.
Yeah.
That here's where it's coming from. This also is the language that was vetted by IRB. And you can see what we get here is these 4 choices. You pick, one of them. You can see, right, here we see this is just copy and pasted, right? So this is not good at all. A man works through a math problem with a boy, sure. The male is telling a female, to try the last one, possibly a math question, but she is saying it cannot be 18, which means she probably knows the answer. Child is working on, and notice there's a difference in gender because we've got a younger kid. So you see this a lot where it's like, it's not clear to people if that's a boy or a girl. A child is working on the last question and gives the answer to an adult. The adult mishears and apologizes to the child for the mistake. I like that one, except this is not one sentence. That's a few sentences. That's a comma splice right there. So I would probably this.
And I never apologize to my children.
That's true, right? There is no sorry in there. It's implied where you say like, oh, it could be, but that's not actually even in the thing. I don't think the person who is you says, I'm sorry.
No, it's not implied, it's inferred.
So anyway, that's the question. Now, you'll notice, and we're already at almost an hour here. You'll notice one thing Qualtrics also allows you to do, and we've talked about this, but we kind of moved away from it because we were like, that sounds too complicated. However, it's not. So I put in a second version of the question where, as you can see here, it says, please listen to the following 20-second audio clip and then rank the 4 provided one-sentence summaries of it written by Turkers from most readable top to least readable bottom. And you can see these aren't the same thing because it's the same pool, but a different draw.
Yeah.
And you can see when you go over it, it gives you these numbers, and what you do is drag and drop. So if we sort this, child reaches the final answer of a test and tells the teacher that's helping him. The answer can be 18. Okay, a male and a female discuss a math problem. There's a misunderstanding. Those are both pretty good. Can be 18. That's not that good. So probably I'd rank them like this, and then maybe this, because I didn't hear that it was a test. So I'd probably do that. And what happens on the back end is you get basically just this 1, 2, 3, 4 for these responses. Now I bring this up because I'm leaning, after I was dealing with this, I'm leaning more towards the ranking version of it, and I'll tell you why. Because we've got 50 summaries in each pool. Each one's going to be seen 10 times because it's 500, at least right now, and what we've got money for is 500 runs of this thing, which means that each one's going to get picked 10 times, right? They're all balanced. That's what Qualtrics is doing. Each one's going to be shown 10 times. If it's an all or nothing, choose the best, there's not a whole lot of data there, right? It's, what do you think we're going to see? We're going to see a lot that gets 0 because they're just, they're like that one that was just copy and paste, right? That's never going to win unless the person responding to that hit is also just randomly picking, which we can't discount. But in the aggregate, it's like, that's not going to get a lot of wins, presumably.
Right.
And then the ones that do get a lot of wins, what's a lot, right? Max is 10. So I suspect what you're going to see is a lot that get like 6, right? So we're going to have these tiers where it's like 6, 5, 4, and then a bunch of zeros or something like that. Do you know what I mean?
Right. Yeah.
The data, because 500 sounds like a lot, but it's not. It's not when you're talking about 50 items in the pool, because then each one is only going to get shown 10 times. if we were doing this thousands and thousands of times, I would expect to see a scatter, right? But we're not doing that. So I was thinking, like, if you do the ranking, what that means is every time, each of those 10, it gets a score.
Yeah.
And sometimes that score is 4 because it's garbage. Sometimes that score is 1 because it's very good. Sometimes that score will be 2 because it's very good, but it's up against one that is also very good.
I think, and that I think really helps make the case because the relative strength of a summary is relative to what it was sort of randomly packaged with.
Yes.
So you could have 4 good ones that all get put in one pool and then one gets picked. So like imagine a scenario where you've got 4 acceptable ones that might on their own get picked as readable.
Right, which will happen.
But they're all stacked up against each other. And so only one of them gets picked and then you lose the.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, or, imagine a scenario where 3 of them are absolute garbage and one of them is okay. And that one wins. And now that's just going to happen because of the way this works. But what the ranking does is it's a much more sort of fine grained, because every time you're getting a ranking, there's also a difference between like one that consistently scores 3 and one that consistently scores 4. When I was doing this, I was like, the one that says like, they're talking about 18. That's better than one that says nice. It just is. Right?
It is. Agreed.
Or one that's, someone's clearly just smashed the keyboard with their palms. Right? Yeah. That's a 4. Whereas 3 is one that's like, at least on subject, but not that great. Like math problem. Right. That's a 3. It's not a 4, but probably like a lot of that's going to get lost. So all of this is like, I think the ranking is a much more sophisticated way. And then what you do at the end of that is just average their scores. If you get close to a 1, you get like a 1.06 versus a 1.14. And then down the scale, down to like a 3 point, whatever, you just average them out. And that tells you your average rank. Yeah.
And that gives us, because it's also, as you pointed out, we're at each stage of data collection, we have to make decisions about what to emphasize. If we just did the pick the one, it might be that we'll be just as interested in the ones that get 4s.
Yeah.
So if we don't rank, we won't really have any kind of way to get at the bad ones.
I think you'll have an undifferentiated mass of bad.
Yeah. And we want a differentiated mass of bad.
We want gradations of bad, right? Why is this one, why did nice win, a couple of times or whatever? So all this is to say, I think the ranking is a better one. Yes. For what we're trying to do. The caveat is this. What I'm going to have to do if we go with ranking, and see, part of the reason why, because we talked about doing ranking, we were like, that sounds like a huge pain in the ass. And we're not sure if we can do it. But then in tinkering with Qualtrics, I was like, no, it's super easy. And Qualtrics, in fact, like the way it handles the data is great, because it just basically gives you, here's the question, and here's all the rankings it got. And it's like, do you want me to average this for you? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Yeah, please knock yourself out.
But the thing of it is, I think if we go with that, what I want to do is contact Amy Evans in my IRB board and say, hey, what you guys vetted was this question that said, pick the best. What we want to do is have them rank them. And indeed, that's going to impact the hit description a little bit. Yeah. Because the description says pick the best. We're going to have to change that. See, I don't think that's the kind of thing that rises to an IRB doesn't. I think if I submit this, they'll be like, you're wasting our time, Yeah. Because basically what I'm asking you to do is it okay if instead of asking them to pick the best, I'm asking them to rank the 4? Like from an IRB perspective, they're like, we just care if it's going to hurt them. We don't give a crap if you're asking them to pick the best or rank. That doesn't change the risk profile.
Yeah, unless there's now research out there about the existential harm of Likert scales,
Yeah.
you're probably okay.
But I don't want to make that call myself. So if we're
Yeah,
going to do
no,
a
that's fair.
question, what I want to do is then contact Amy Evans, who we've talked to before, and say, hey, I'd like to make this change. Do I need to submit an addendum, or do you think this doesn't rise to anything they'd want to see? And I think she'll be able to tell me. It's like, no, or yeah, since we checked the language, go ahead and do it, or whatever.
Yeah.
All right. So anywho, that's the gist of it. And then as we discussed, after that, it's got these two scale questions, right? Please rate how clear the instructions for this hit were. And you just, click it along here. Please rate how fair the reward was. And you also notice this compels you to answer these questions. I don't compel you to answer the ranking one. And the reason why is if it so happens that these fall in ranked order, which will happen.
They won't move them.
Yeah, if you don't touch them, if you look at it, it's like, no, that actually looks correct. And you click next, it'll say wrong. And I'm like, yeah, but if that's right, then it's not. So I don't force you to answer to tinker with this. The others I did force you just so you get them.
Yeah.
Let me answer that, and then let me show you here. Then it gives you this, right? Thank you for completing this survey. Your response has been recorded. Make sure to submit the following survey completion code in MTurk to receive credit for taking the survey. So you copy that, and then you paste it. Oh crap! I just accidentally hit close. Oh well. You paste that here, and then we can match them up. And Qualtrics remembers that random number. It assigns it with that submission.
Wow.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, and I've only scratched the surface of that tool. But yeah, I mean, a lot of those things, it's like, I'm sure there's things that are built for this. It's like, yeah, Qualtrics is built for precisely this kind of stuff, and it's pretty sophisticated with it.
Yeah. Yeah, which is again, I mean, given the roots and goals of this project, the idea that our capacity, our readability is like, well, Qualtrics lets us easily do rank order. So now guess how we're going to read these
precisely
in rank order, because a month ago it was like, well, that seems like something that's beyond our ability to do.
Yeah. A lot of this stuff, as is always the case with research, I mean, you can never ignore like material conditions. So it's like, yeah, but what can I actually do? What do I have the money to do? Those are real things. It's not just sort of like, well, if the cuffs were completely off me and I could do everything. You're always dealing with questions of, yeah, but I have to make choices here, and those choices are going to be meaningful whether you want them to be or not.
Yeah, there's no busy work, right? It's all the work.
Anywho, so that's kind of where we are. So I think what the next step would be is to contact Amy Evans in IRB and say, hey, if we want to switch to ranking instead of picking on that question, do I need to submit that as an addendum to the IRB proposal, or is that minor enough that it just doesn't, change the risk profile for the respondents? I suspect that's what she'll say, is like, that doesn't seem like it rises to the level of you needing to do it, but I don't know, and I don't want to make that call.
Yeah.
That's the gist. The other thing, and we don't have too much time, but related to this, is paying for it.
Yeah.
My grant money is because, if just going by, if this is 50 cents and we're doing 500 for 4 different media, so that's 2,000, 50 cents, that's $1,000 just in rewards. And MTurk wets their beak as well, of course. I think it's 20% just to list it. Mm-hmm. So that's another, 20% to 50 cents. And then I think there's an additional 20% if you're asking for, there's a threshold of number of respondents. And like, remember, in the first phase, we were only asking for 5 for each of those hits. And that falls under the threshold, but I think the threshold is 10. I'll have to check. And beyond that, they tack on another 20%, I think. So you're talking 40% in fees. So, I mean, if it's $1, you're paying $1.40 for this to happen, and if my math is correct, then you're talking about what, 70 cents for, instead of 50 cents, it's 70, right? So
yeah. So we actually do have to get this bonus situation worked out.
We do. I mean, I think the takeaway is we're gonna be using your money as well. And as we were kind of stumbling toward, it's like doing that is not super easy. I mean, like with my grant, it's not easy. It's not like they just cut you a check usually.
Yeah.
In my case, they really had to go through some hurdles to do it.
It may be our next episode 50 is just UI and the administrative assistant from my department meeting. Because I think I made a note. I think I'm gonna email them and set up a Zoom, because as you pointed out, it's linked to the easiest way is going to be actually the easiest. That's probably at this point sounds the most sketchy is we have to get the money to you.
Yes. Yeah. The easiest way, because it's tied to an Amazon account, in this case, my Amazon account, I'm the requester.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm paying for these, so I need your grant money. Now there's ways around that, such as, well, let's just make you a requester, and I can, we can just set up, I can do 2, you can do 2, and we can just set it up on yours, and then you can be compensated. There may be some ways to skate it, like, as I mentioned, potentially you could use your grant money to buy a prepaid Visa. I could then associate that Visa with my Amazon account, right? Because it can only spend what the prepaid amount is, and then buy hits that way. But all of this, it's like, you got to clear it with the, whoever your grant entity is, because they don't just give you money and say, do whatever you want with it.
Yeah. Yeah, because you also wouldn't be. Yeah, because I'd also need, if I was figuring out a way to get you the money. I hate even using the phrase "get you the money" because that does make it sound even extra sketchy. Right? You're not the vendor. The vendor is Amazon.
And I can give you a receipt for purchased hits, because you can prepay. I mean, you can basically, you pay for them in advance, but it's like that receipt's going to me.
Yeah, we may need to actually have a meeting about this.
Well, and one thing you can do, I mean, what helped me is someone at your institution has dealt with Turk. I mean, somebody in the social sciences has paid grant money to do this. I mean, that's kind of one thing, is I was like, in my emails, I was like, surely someone in social sciences has done this before me. I know it's weird because I'm in English, but somebody's done this on campus. I guarantee it. We just need to find, how did you use grant money to pay for Turk? And then it's like, well, let's just do that,
Yeah. And I think it makes more sense to not make me, or because we kind of want to, I'm guessing it makes more just logistical sense to keep this in one place.
It does. The question will be if your granting entity is okay with that, because otherwise it is basically being routed through me in some fashion.
Yeah.
We'll have to see. We don't know. We'll have to see.
Yeah. So I need to go.
That's your task, is to figure this out.
Yeah. Hey, can I get a prepaid Visa card with my grant money? Sure. I can't imagine that raising any red flag. Can I get this just in a paper bag of non-consecutive 20s? Yeah.
I mean, the way to start this conversation is, here's what I'd like to do. Is I need to pay for to pay for Turk. Here are the complications involved in that.
Yeah.
And it was complicated, because I was in kind of the same boat where they were like, well, can you use like a departmental credit card? And I'm like, no, because I'd have to put that departmental credit card on my personal Amazon account. Yeah. And they were like, nope, you can't do that. And I was like, I know I can't do that.
Yeah, that's why I didn't ask for that.
That seems dangerous for everybody. I don't want the responsibility of it either, I mean,
it may be that actually a bag of cash is the least suspicious option.
My policy is I don't want responsibility. I don't want that. It's like, I don't want keys to anything, because then, inevitably
You're a suspect.
Yeah. They're like, who's got keys to this? I'm like, God damn it.
Yeah. You're the first person they go interview at the beginning of every Law and Order episode.
Yeah. Anywho, so your task is to figure how to use your grant money to do this. If you have questions for me, because it wasn't super, I mean, it was fine, but it wasn't super easy. For me, I had to get over some hurdle. Nobody was at fault. It's just there are checks in place to make sure. In my case, it was like, this specifically wasn't for like salary remuneration.
Yeah.
Right? It was like, it has to be spent on certain stuff. And so there, there are just checks in place to make sure it's being spent on stuff and not like your own labor.
Yeah. Yeah. And in this case, the stuff is somebody else's labor.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well,
that's your task. And my task is contacting IRB about, hey, if we go to rank, do I need to then submit an addendum?
Okay. Yeah, I will get on the money thing, and I may, yeah, but I think I'll sort of just, here's what's up, and potentially we might know somebody. There might be the finance person in sociology knows how to do this.
Yep.
Yeah, the additional complication, is how to do this through your Amazon account, because that seems to simplify things, at least on the not the payment end, but certainly on the study end.
Yeah.
We don't want to have to be aggregating two different.
Right. Though the good news is, see, in this scenario, even if it was you, it wouldn't be a big deal, because all you'd be doing is that MTurk thing I showed you, the Qualtrics. You just use that same link.
Oh.
You know what I mean? It wouldn't be a big deal because it's Qualtrics that's actually doing the survey. All MTurk is saying, here's the link and paste in your code. And so we would have to match them up.
So basically, we wouldn't have two different hits. We have two, I mean, they would be, right? But it would just be two portals to the same hit.
It'd be two portals to the same survey. Yep.
Yeah.
It's the Qualtrics survey. And the only difference from like a Turker's perspective would be the requester. I think like when you look at my hits, the requester, I think, is actually like UNCW summary survey or something like that. And yours would, be different. But like we'd use the exact same description and title. The requester's name would be different, but all that hit would be is, here's the link, and now paste in your code.
I mean, obviously it does, but does it do it in a significant way? Does it? I mean, given how we've thought about issues of duration, and I mean, given that we know that it matters who the requester is for some Turkers, if they've worked with them before,
well, for example, I mean, I did the entire first phase, and it's very possible to probable that some Turkers are like, hey, that was easy and I got paid pretty well. I'm going to note that requester.
Yeah.
So from the study's perspective, it definitely would be best if they all came from the same one, which at this point is me. But realistically, just in terms of compensation, we'll see if that's possible.
And because I asked too, because it might come down to that. I might have to say,
it's an argument you could make that it's like part of the study is itself dealing with these kinds of issues, and it really would benefit the study if it all comes from the same place.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, that'll be an interesting Zoom.
Yeah. All right, then. So we know what we're doing.
Okay. All right. No, that Qualtrics stuff looks really good.
Yeah, it's neat. It's a great tool.
Yeah. Okay.
All right. I will talk to you later.
Okay. I'll report back.
All right. See ya.